In this video, I am going to show you how to use the Vector Unwrapper tool to help you create some very interesting shapes such as the square shape here and the octagonal shapes here on the spindle that you've seen in previous videos. This will help you to make some very interesting shapes for rotary profiles. So without further ado, let's come to File and we're going to click on Open, and we're going to open up our rotary spindle file. Okay, so with our file now open, we need to have a look at the shapes that we want to create. So I want to create a box shape in this area here where I'm hovering my mouse, and I want to create an octagonal shape in this bulbous area here on my spindle. Now to do that, I actually need to use the Vector Unwrapper tool, which is over on the left hand side under Transform Objects, and it is this one just here, which is the Unwrapped Selected Object tool. Now it's important to note that this tool only appears if you have a rotary job setup. Otherwise, you will not see this tool under Transform Objects. Now, what we're effectively going to do is have a square drawn. So if you imagine the box I'm going to be making, it will be centered on the center of the spindle here. So the box will be around this spindle, and the same applies for the octagonal shape. But to actually create those vectors, what we need to do is take some measurements. So I'm just going to pop over to the 2D view for the moment, because we're going to take some measurements of our spindle. So to actually take these measurements, let's come over to the measure tool, which is over here under Edit Objects. So we can click on the measure tool just here. Now what we actually need to do is measure the distance from the center of the spindle here to the area that we're going to put the box in now, which is this area just here. So this area, I'm hovering my mouse over this flat area here. So this bottom left part is the center of my spindle, and I need to measure it from the center of the spindle to the highest point here for the square. Now, if I left mouse click on this area, you'll notice in the top left here on the left hand side, I've got a y distance of 1.4. Now that's actually half of the square as it is flat, because this is halfway down the spindle. So this point here is halfway. So really that value needs to be 2.8 to get my square across the flat. We need to also do the same thing for the octagonal shape, but in this instance we need to take two measurements. We need to take a measurement at the lowest point and the highest point. So this is the area I'll be doing my octagonal shape in. So what I will do is come down to the bottom left again from the center of the spindle. I will left mouse click there, and this is the very bottom point or the lowest point of my octagonal space. So I'll click here, and the value I get is 0.75. Again, we need to double that, so that will be 1.5. And then we're going to have a look at the highest point. So again, down to the center of the spindle, come up to the top here to the highest point. You can see my mouse has snapped to that because I've got my snapping options turned on. And I will left mouse click, and we get a measurement of 1.75, which means this highest point is actually going to be doubled to 3.5. So I've made a note of all these areas. So our square across the flat is 1.4 or 2.8 in total. The lowest point on my octagonal shape is 0.75 or 1.5, and the highest point is 1.75, and doubled it is 3.5. So now we can actually utilize these measurements in our Vector Unwrapper tool. So let's have a look at how we're going to use those in just a moment. So let's close out of the form, and let's create our first vector, which is going to be the rectangle vector. So I'm just going to click on the Draw Rectangle tool under Create Vectors. And if you recall from earlier, I had my measurement of 1.4 from the center of the spindle to the top height of this area here that we're going to create a square for, which was 1.4. So we're going to double that to 2.8 and 2.8 for the width and the height. And we can left mouse click in this area to create that square. So let's just close out the form, because now we're going to have a look at unwrapping this. So to do that, let's go over to the Transform Objects section of the Design tab, and we'll click on this option here to unwrap the selected object. Now you can see the description here of the tool says, drag the center of rotation directly in the 2D view or set its position using the options below. So the first one is using the center of the contour. So currently the center of rotation is the center of the contour being our square vector. Now you'll notice there's a circle around this square, which is our spindle, and the center of rotation is this crosshair in the middle here. Now you can actually resize the square if you want to, or indeed move it around, and the center of rotation will follow that. So if you ever need to resize the square for any reason, you can do so. I'm just going to press Ctrl Z on the keyboard to undo that change. And if I also zoom in, you'll notice there's a little bit of clearance here as well. And that exists in order for the box cross-section to fit into the cylinder when we create toolpaths for this. Now the next option, if we just zoom to our drawing limits here with this option in the top right, to zoom active view to the drawing limits, is use the center of the workspace. Now if I click on this option, you notice the circle has now moved to the middle and the rotation point has moved to the middle. And that is because if you ever have a vector that is in the middle of your workspace, you can use this option here to immediately place the center of rotation for the Vector Unwrapper into the middle of the workspace. So really helpful if you already have vector set up in the middle of your job, you can immediately use this option to utilize in that case. And then we also have this option here, which is to use a custom point. So if I click on that, I can actually set a value. So for example, in this case, I could put X 1.5. And you'll notice that it has now moved the center of rotation in X to 1.5. So this is useful if you don't want the linear axis in the center of the vector that you want to unwrap. You can also simply left mouse click and drag this and move this around. And you'll notice that the values in the form are changing as well. But in my case, I want to unwrap the box with a cylinder axis going through the center. So I'm just going to use this option here. And then finally, we have this option at the bottom here, which says to simplify unwrapped vectors. So when we come to unwrap the vector, by default, it will create a vector that is made up of straight lines only. So using the simplify option in the software will do its best to auto fit some Bezier spans to the unwrapped vector. And this is particularly beneficial for when we come to create a model using the unwrapped vector, because if the vectors are smooth, then ultimately our model will be smooth as well. So we're going to select this option to simplify the unwrapped vector. So I'll just left mouse click on that and we can hit apply to see what occurs. So we can actually see that in the middle of my job here, I've now got a set of unwrapped vectors. In fact, I'm just going to close out of my tool. So just close out the unwrap tool here. And now we can see right in the middle of our worksheet, we have our unwrapped vectors. Now I need to actually flip these around. So if you press the number 9 on the keyboard, it will rotate this in increments of 45 degrees. So I've pressed 9 twice there to move it out. And I'm just going to click and drag this down out of the way for the moment, just so we can have a clear view of all of our parts. Now, it's important to note that when you actually use the Vector Unwrapper tool, it does create some extra layers. So if we come up to the top here and click on our layers tab, you'll notice I have some extra layers now. I've got the unwrapped vectors drive rails. Now, if I double left mouse click on this, you'll notice that around the edge or the perimeter of my job here, I've got a drive rail at the top and one at the bottom. So this is useful if you ever want to have a drive rail and then use the unwrapped shape as your profile to drive across these rails, so you can drive that shape across these rails. But in this case, I don't actually need it, so I'm going to delete it. So I can click this little icon to the right of the unwrapped vector drive rails, and I'm going to choose delete. Delete this, and if you recall from the other videos, if you use this option here to delete data, it will get rid of the data on that layer. So let's click OK, and they are now gone. You'll also notice in my list I have the unwrapped vectors. Now this refers to the vector down here that we have just created. In fact, if I double left mouse click the page icon in the layers menu, it will select that vector here. So nice and clear for you that we've got that on its own separate layer. Now for now, we're actually going to turn off a couple of these layers. What we're going to do is create a new layer, but also turn off some of these layers, okay? So what we're going to do is turn off the components. We're going to turn off the 2 rail sweeps. We're going to keep on the rotary. We'll turn off the pockets and the 3D boundary. And so for now, we've just got our rotary profile and our unwrapped vectors. And we're going to add in a new layer because we're going to create our own rails for the 2 rail sweep. So let's click add new layer. We'll call this one rails, and we'll click to the left of it where there's the black box, and we'll change the color to this aqua color just here. So we're going to use that as its own distinct color, and we'll make sure that this is the active layer. We can click on that to make it the actual active layer, and we're going to have a look at creating our drive rails. So to do that, we're going to go over to the Draw Polyline tool. So if you follow my mouse over to the left, it is this tool just here under the Create Vectors part of the Design tab. And I'm going to wake up this point here because this is the section we're going to be driving through. So I'm going to wake up this point here by left mouse clicking and following when I get to the top here. So I left mouse click now because that's where I want to create my first polyline drawing, and then I wake up this point here, and then I follow my mouse up, and then I left mouse click there, and I can press close to close out the form, and now I've got my drive rail. Now I want one of these on the other side of the job, at the top side here. Now a nice shortcut here that you can use to copy something to the other side of a job vertically is if you press the Shift button on your keyboard, the Control button on your keyboard, and the letter V for Victor. And what that will do is it will create a copy of your current rail or current vector here on the other side. So we've got one at the top here and one at the bottom ready to use as our drive rails. So with that setup complete, what we're going to do is go back up to the Layers tab. We're going to turn on the visibility for our components. So we're going to left mouse click to make it the active layer, because now we're going to have a look at making the component for this unwrapped part here. So to do that, let's follow my mouse pointer over to the left here, and we're going to click on this tool under modeling tools called create a shape between two rail vectors, or the two rail sweep tool. And I'm going to use my rails. So the one at the top, I'm going to hold shift, click the one at the bottom, so they're both selected, and click use selection in the form. So there's my drive rails. And then I'm going to click on the cross section here, which is the one that we've created earlier. We're going to use sweep between spans, and we're going to call this one box. And for the moment, I'm not going to change the combine mode, because I'll show you what happens when we hit apply. You'll notice that if I tile my views, it has now made a box shape, but it's clearly added it to the composite model already. We don't want that. What we actually want it to do is merge with it. So if we change the combine mode here to merge, you'll notice it has now achieved the effect we're looking for. That looks wonderful. Everything looks all good there. I'm happy with that. So I can hit apply, and I can close out the form, and now I have that component ready for use. So that is looking pretty good so far. I'm just going to pop the 2D view back into maximum view. I'm going to click on this button here to zoom active view to drawing limits, and we're going to have a look at now creating our octagon shape or octagonal shape to use as the next unwrapped shape. So let's pop back up to the layers tab. I'm going to turn off our components tab for the moment. We're going to make the unwrapped vectors layer the active layer, and we're going to come up to the draw polygon tool, and we're going to left mouse click into that. Now right away we need to put in the number of sides, and in this case I need 8, so you can press the button here to increase it to 8, or just enter the value 8 here. Now for the radius and the side length, I don't actually know what I want these to be, so I don't actually know the values for these. So for now what I'm going to do is leave this at 1 and click on create. Okay, so wonderful. I've had my first octagon here. I'm going to just move this over here. And then what I'm going to do is use another tool instead to set the size. So I'm going to come over to the left here under Transform Objects and click on Set Selected Object Size tool. Now, in this case, I want to have the Link XY option checked because I want to change both X and Y proportionally. So if I change this value, this will change proportionally as well. Now, if you recall from earlier, when we measured the height from the middle of the spindle here to the highest point here, it was 1.75, which would be 3.5 in total. So that's the value I need to put here to get the right height for my octagon. So if I press apply, that will now change it to the correct height. So that's all good to go for the highest point, which also means we now need to make it an octagon for the lowest point, which was from the middle of the spindle to the lowest point just down here. So with our octagon selected, I'm just going to left mouse click on that again. I'm going to hold Control and the Alt key on the keyboard and drag out another copy of this octagon. And you'll notice that it stayed in line. That's because I was holding the Alt key, and holding the Control key makes a copy of it. So just so you're aware, holding Control on the keyboard while dragging out a vector makes a copy, and holding Alt while you do so keeps it in line. So we need to change the shape size for this octagon as well. So let's go back into the Set Selected Object Size tool. And if you recall the length from the center of the spindle here to the bottom point here was 0.75. So double that, we need to put in 1.5. So let's hit apply, and now we have both the top side and the bottom height octagons created for unwrapping. So let's actually look at unwrapping them. So let's make sure that the first one is selected. Let's go back over to the transform objects area and click on unwrap selected object. And we're going to use the center of the contour. We're going to make sure to simplify the unwrapped vectors, and we'll hit apply. And that has created the unwrapped vector for this octagon shape. And I will do the same for this one. So if I left mouse click on this shape, I will hit apply, and then wonderful, we have our second set of vectors there as well. So now what we're going to do is exactly what we did earlier. I'm going to left mouse click on my vector, and I'm going to press 9 on the keyboard twice to rotate it. And I'm going to left mouse click again and drag this out of the way, just to the bottom right here. And then I'll do the same for this one. So click on the unwrap vector, 9 on the keyboard twice to rotate it to make it horizontal. And we'll move this one out of the way as well. So let's drag that down here. And then finally, we can delete these octagons because I don't need those anymore. We have the unwrapped version of them. And as before, if we go up to our layers tab, we have the drive rails, but we'll be creating our own drive rails. So what we're going to do is click on the menu option to the right of it, delete this, and then we don't need the data on it, so we can delete that data out. And now we are ready to create the drive rails for the highest and lowest points of our octagons here. So to do that, let's come up to the layers tab and let's change the active layer to the rails. So let's double left mouse click on that. And then what we're going to do is go back over to the draw polyline tool on the left under create vectors, and we'll click on that. Now this time I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to show you a different way you can create the polyline tool. Similar to how you could do before, we could hover up to here by waking up this point, or we could just click on this point here and then click on this point here. So we know that it's the length of the span that we want to create, and then simply we can just nudge this up using the arrow keys, or indeed drag it until it meets the bottom of the sheet here. So I can just drag that to snap it in place at the bottom of my worksheet. Now, as before, what we're going to do is create a copy of this on the other side. So again, we'll do Control Shift and the letter V, and it creates another copy on the top side here. And so what we're going to do now is ensure that the way that this works is that the smaller octagonal shape comes in here at the low point and then blends into the larger height, at which point that will blend into the rest of the shape where it's no longer octagonal. So how do we achieve that? Well, what we're going to do first is edit the highest point and look at the highest point on our drive rail here. So what we're going to do is draw another polyline. So if we go back into the polyline tool, we're going to snap to the very highest point here, which is just here on my spindle. I'm going to just draw a line from here straight up over to the other side. Now this is going to help me in just a moment with placing some nodes. Now, if we click on our drive rail at the bottom here and press N for November on the keyboard, you'll notice there's a midpoint here that I can manipulate for this vector. And I'm actually going to click and drag that, and I can actually snap it to this polyline that I've created here and let go. And that midpoint is now on the line that we have just created there. And I'll do the same at the top. While in node edit mode, I'll click on the midpoint here. I'll click and drag that over to this line, let go as it snaps to it, and then wonderful, our nodes are now placed in the right place for us to utilize in just a moment. Now I'm just going to press escape to come out of node editing. I'm going to delete this vector. I don't need this middle line anymore. I just used it to help me guide my nodes there. And we actually don't even need the legs on our unwrapped vectors here. So I'm going to press N on the keyboard again to go into node edit mode, and while hovering over this span, this leg here that I don't need, press the D key on the keyboard for delete, and it will delete that span. And we'll do the same on this side, and then we'll click on this vector down here and we'll do the same again. So delete and delete. So now no more spans on those sides. we can press escape on the keyboard, and this is our vectors set up now to help create our components. Now, the reason why I removed the legs off of these unwrapped vectors is because we actually want the octagonal shape to add on top of the existing bulbous shape. So that's how we do that, is by removing those leg spans there, okay? So now what we'll need to do is actually create the component here. So using our rails and using our unwrap vectors, let's go back into the 2-rail sweep tool, and we're going to click the top rail and the bottom rail, and we're going to use selection, and then I'm going to use the bottom vector first because that's what we're going to apply at the bottom end here to our bulbous shape. So I'm going to click on this node, this start node at the bottom here. You can see the green node here, that's the start node. And you notice I get a little check icon implying that I can do so on where my mouse pointer is. So let's click on that, and it has now applied that shape. And then when it comes to the second profile, I'll be using this unwrap vector here. Pay attention to my mouse. As I hover it over to the left, eventually it's going to pick up on that midpoint just there. You can see the difference on my mouse pointer to the right of it as a check mark, and then underneath it a node appears. So that's telling me it knows that node is there, and that is why we moved the node earlier, so we can click on that, and that's where we can place our larger octagonal shape profile. So what will happen is we'll have the smaller height to the larger height, and then blending back down to meet this bulbous shape here, back blending down into this kind of curve down here. We're going to call this one Octagonal Overlay, and I'm just going to tile my views, and I'm going to hit apply so we can have a look at what that looks like. And you can see here now that it's applied that octagonal shape all the way around, but crucially, as we mentioned, it's gone from the bottom point all the way up to the high point, and then merges all the way down here in respect to the contour of the shape here. So it respects that profile, and that looks really great. So I'm just going to close out of my form. And now we're actually at a stage where we can look at now recalculating our toolpaths to apply it to the model here. So what we can do is now switch over to the toolpath menu. So if we go to the top left here, left mouse click this button to go to the toolpath menu, and then I can just maximize my 3D view here, and I can just drag this to the top, and now we're ready to have a look at recalculating our toolpaths. Now, because we haven't created any new components outside of the existing vector boundaries that we specified when creating the original toolpaths, we should be able to just recalculate the toolpaths here without any issue. So if we come to this button here with the green recalculate sign, we can click on that, and you can see the software is now recalculating all the toolpaths, and we've got a positive message to say that all toolpaths were successfully recalculated. So let's go into the preview toolpaths form. We'll reset the preview, and we'll click on preview all toolpaths. So we can now have a look, as we mentioned in previous videos, where it's machining it flat and then I'll wrap it around, because the software does think it is a flat job, and then the post-processor's role is to wrap the Y moves in this case, because I'm cutting an X, to A moves, and that will produce this spindle here. So this is a pretty accurate representation of what you're going to see when you come to actually cut this out. So that looks all good. That is our spindle all ready to go. And at this stage, you could then save out your toolpaths, and there is a dedicated video on how to save toolpaths, which we will link below. But one thing we should cover is, what if you wanted to export this out as a model? Well, you actually can do that. So if you press the button up the top right here to switch to the design commands menu, if you click on this icon just in the top here in the design tab under file operations called export visible model as an STL file, this gives you the option to export this model as an STL file. And we want to have this one as closed sides. We can click on triangulate, and the software will calculate that, and now we have our STL model. So you can now save that triangulation, so you can export that and then import that into the software, or indeed third-party software if you needed to. But with that in mind, let's close out of the form, and let's just have a look at our final result again. And of course, you can now save your file as well, so we can click on File and Save, and this will save all the changes that we've currently made to the file. So now this is all ready for you to go, and of course this file will be available to you in your projects folder when you save it out as well. However, that brings us to the close and the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed the process of creating, toolpathing and manipulating the spindle that we have done over the 3 videos, and we will link other useful videos such as an introduction to rotary machining, as well as other rotary videos that you may find useful in the description below for you as well. But for now, we'll see you in the next video.